In 2063, scientists find a planet that can support human life. A woman argues that the planet is suited for human colonization as it is shown on TV. Given that the trip will take 86 years, she recommends that a mission to scout the planet be started. The third generation will be the ones to arrive, and the crew will have to procreate on board. The DNA of leading scientists is combined to genetically design the crew on Earth. A man explains the rationale for this, stressing the significance of designing a team that is well educated and prepared for the mission. Determining when they'll be prepared to leave is the next step. Resources will be preserved longer by a younger team. Lead scientist Richard, however, is concerned that they might not have the requisite expertise for the mission's complexity. Later, Richard goes to the place where the kids are raised. When he enters their living space while wearing safety clothing, the kids applaud. After evaluating their training progress, Richard puts Zack and Christopher Sella to bed. Richard tells Zack he's safe when he shows signs of worry. The next day, Richard suggests to a woman in charge of the operation that he go with the kids to watch over and protect them. By including him, the expedition might begin in 4 years rather than 7. Richard is in charge of the shuttle docking with Humanitas, the mission's main ship, when the mission finally begins. The crew looks around their space. Richard then gives Earth one final glance. The children are now adults 10 years later, observed going about their regular activities on board the ship. When they become 24, they will start learning about fertilization for the second generation. As part of their routine, the group acts systematically while consuming a blue liquid. While Sailor looks at the sky outside the ship, Christopher and Zack enjoy some classical music. Richard is later told by Sulla that their lives seem pointless. To comfort her, Richard emphasizes the significance of safeguarding humanity's future while displaying to her pictures of his ancestors. That evening, awakened, Christopher listens to the sounds of the ship. A notice regarding water toxicity was discovered the following day while inspecting the hydroponics bay's plants. Christopher sees him on his screen. Richard brushes off his suspicion that there may be a chemical problem with pee recycling. After Christopher and Zack discuss his worries, they learn more about a drug known as T56J. They circumvent security measures out of curiosity. They find that the blue liquid contains the chemical. In order to avoid overpopulation and natural reproduction, they drink and conceal their feelings and urges. After discovering a secret chamber on the ship, they quit drinking it and tell Kai and Julie what they have discovered. Richard is confronted by Christopher over the secret pod during a session. 23. Richard acknowledges that there may be a reason why the mission leaders kept information from him, implying that the pod is intended for the third generation. In a subsequent message to Earth, Richard requests permission to be open and honest with the crew. Christopher, meanwhile, starts to fantasize about Sailor and notices her differently. He keeps staring at her during lunch, which makes Zack remark on how she's changed. Richard steps in and reminds them of the rules when Zack touches her. In the gym, tensions increase as Christopher and Zack fight physically, leaving the others perplexed and unable to comprehend what's going on. Both of them start to experience the consequences of abstaining from the medication. They head to an observation chamber after hearing odd sounds emanating from the spacecraft. They see one of their crew members there. He proposes that it might be an extraterrestrial life form as the three talk about possible explanations. Richard shows Sela some dried plants from Earth when they are in his office. Zack and Christopher come into the room after overhearing their chat. Zack becomes envious as he sees Richard stroking Saleh's shoulder. Richard alerts the crew to the transmitter's problem when communication with Earth is lost. In order to fix things, he chooses to bring Zack along, letting the other crew members finish their work. While the planning goes on, Zack looks for Sela. He will need a suit for the mission, she explains. However, he starts inappropriately touching her. Zack is pulled away by Richard, who steps in and demands an explanation. But while looking for Zack, Zack runs away. When Richard runs into Phoebe, she tells him that Zack has stopped using the medication. Richard later meets Christopher and finds out that he has also stopped taking it. The two quarrel. Richard clarifies, however, that the medication was created to stop actions similar to Zack's. He persuades Christopher to help mend the transmitter and asks him to help with mission control after it is fixed. As the spacewalk preparations proceed, the crew stays at their places. Zack, meanwhile, slips outside into the systems room. The transmitter is being worked on by Richard and Christopher. Richard begins to watch Christopher as he begins to perceive strange feelings. After fixing one transmitter component, Richard moves on to the next. The crew is uneasy as spooky sounds reappear within the ship. Richard gets hurt when he is thrown away from the ship by an odd force that appears on the screen close to him and Christopher. The ship has a problem, and the systems room catches fire. Richard is saved by Christopher and taken inside, where Sailor and the rest of the medical staff attempt to save him. They try, but Richard doesn't make it. Additionally, Sela declares him dead in his capacity as chief medical officer. The crew gets together to talk about what happened. The creaking sounds and something on the display that look to leap into Richard, possibly an alien force, are mentioned by someone. As Phoebe starts to cry, Christopher tells them all to remain composed and cooperate. The crew examines the surveillance footage when the ship's systems restart and finds that all records were lost due to the fire. To choose a new chief officer, an election is held. The crew votes for Christopher, who assumes leadership, even though Zack nominates himself. Congratulate him, Zack, even though you're jealous. In order to fix the transmitter and other broken systems, Christopher gathers the team. Recovery of surveillance footage is given last priority in the hopes of learning Richard's fate later. Sala visits Richard's office and examines his private images and recordings. There, Christopher discovers her. She explains that although she is hesitant, she is required to destroy Richard's archive. Christopher and she discuss the value of family after she shows him some of Richard's photos. He suspects that they were more than just buddies and questions why Richard told her about his life. Richard was just feeling lonely, she explains. They watch his video journal, in which he fervently discusses his devotion to the crew and his belief in the mission. Disappointed that they aren't at their posts, Christopher looks for the crew and discovers them in the cantina. In order to preserve their food supply, Zack explains, they are fixing the refrigerators. Zack proposes that they honor their new top officer with a feast made from the food that would go bad. Everyone discards the blue beverage when Kai tells them not to drink it after the meal. Sela and Christopher laugh and become closer as they watch Richard's videos together. Christopher is drawn to her more and more. As the others silently watch, Zack and Julie move closer and their attraction becomes clear. Playfully, the crew members chase one another around the ship. They eventually start looking into Richard's private archive. They are caught in Sel's quarters and told to leave. However, they oppose. The final person to go, Zack informs Sela that Richard is no longer there to keep her safe. Distressed, she goes back to the medical bay and grabs a scalpel. Christopher comes next. Zack finds Sela in the med bay first, despite his fears that he might hurt her. Christopher acts as though he and Sela are intimate when Zack shows there, which makes Zack leave. The scalpel was still in Sela's hand. Doubts Christopher's motives, but he tells her he wants to assist Sela, who begs him to concentrate on the crew members who are losing control. When Christopher sees Zack again, he cautions him against Sela. At that moment, the odd crackling sound reverberates throughout the ship. They follow the sound and warn the others. Kai has a violent reaction when he witnesses Julie approaching another crew member. A fight breaks out after he punches the man. Christopher steps in later and insists that the team attend to the injuries of both men before calling a meeting. Christopher is adamant throughout the meeting that the fighting must end and that repairs must go on. Zack questions his authority, claiming that because they won't live to see the mission through to completion, it is pointless. Christopher responds that their grandkids will and that it is their duty to make sure the mission is successful. After Richard's death, another crew member refuses to work in the systems room, accusing Christopher of being responsible for the alien's presence and asserting that it resides there. To find the truth, Phoebe proposes repairing the surveillance system. Zack, however, makes fun of her and attempts to incite the crew against Christopher. Zack asserts that he is a superior leader and persuades a few crew men to join him, saying that they would be powerful enough to face the alien. However, Christopher's team enters the systems room with caution and works on fixing the surveillance system. Later on, Zack and Kai walk into the same room without realizing Christopher is already there. Something frightens Zack and Kai as they investigate further, and they run away, shutting the room. They say the extraterrestrial attacked them when they return. Christopher gets the security tape in the meanwhile and shows it to Sela and a few other people in the medical bay. The video shows that Richard was electrocuted by Zack and Kai, who also made up the alien narrative. Until they come up with a strategy, the group chooses to keep this revelation a secret. Sela and Christopher talk about Zack while hiding the video in her room. Without the drug, Christopher thinks the crew's actions show who they really are. Sela, however, disputes this, stating that some are distinct. Christopher fears that neither he nor the crew will care about the truth. He is reassured by Sela, who asks him to remain with her. After sharing a kiss and spending the night together, the cellar's door is knocked on in the wee hours of the morning. In one way or another, Zack is proclaiming his arrival. Zack and Kai encourage Sela and Christopher to join another party at the cantina as soon as they open the door. When Christopher's group gets there, Zack invites them to join the others who are already dining. After everyone has taken their seats, Zack gets up and announces that he is now the new chief officer. Christopher, however, cuts in, approaching a monitor to play video from a recent incident. He tells them all that Zack killed Richard and made up the alien tail to control them. While they confer with the software and determine a plan of action, Christopher believes Zack couldn't find himself in his quarters. As mayhem breaks out, Zack admits that he acted to keep them safe because the alien was inside. Richard, Christopher Zack brings the group on board, persuading them that the alien is still there, hidden among humans, and that they need to locate and eliminate it. As Zack turns the crew against one another, this causes paranoia. They hunt for the med bay crewman they believe is sheltering the extraterrestrial. After Kai hits him first, the others begin hitting him till he dies. While Zack and his supporters arm themselves in the medical bay, Christopher and his group withdraw to a safe area of the ship. Some members of Christopher's group argue that since Zack's group is outnumbered and unarmed, they should surrender. Christopher is reminded by Selo of the ship's concealed armaments. Christopher finds the hidden compartment and sets out on his own to acquire the weapons. But he triggers a warning to Julie and another crew member. Zack leads his gang to the compartment when they tell him. Zack's team had disassembled the compartment and discovered the weaponry by the time Christopher gets back. Zack maintains that they, not future generations, are the intended users of the weapons. Additionally, 2 people from Christopher's group defected. Outside, Sala, Phoebe, and Christopher decide to approach Zack as he wants to know where the others are. Phoebe disagrees to Christopher's suggestion that Zack be killed. Sala, who is keeping an eye on Zack's group, observes their activities and alerts her group that they should turn off the electricity and enter the chamber. Sala, who has captured Christopher's group, steps in as they are dragging Christopher away and asks to speak with Zack alone. She approaches him while feigning an interest in joining his group. Zack dismisses her with a giggle, only for Phoebe to intervene and appeal for harmony and reason. Kai kills her without warning when the others reject her cries. Zack even took advantage of the pandemonium, shocking everyone. Zack's crew follows Christopher and Sailor as they flee. They conceal something that is soon found out. Julie warns Zack that firing into the vent could harm their food supply. He sends someone inside to check, but as Christopher and Sela run from being shot at and look for weapons, they narrowly escape again. When Kai enters the medical bay, Christopher reaches for a fire extinguisher, rendering him unconscious and ultimately killing him. Zack finds them and shoots them as they run away. Christopher tells Sailor to put on a space suit as they seek safety in an airlock. Just as Zack comes and fires, he plugs the airlock glass, unintentionally opening the hatch. Zack struggles with Sela to close the hatch as the abrupt vacuum drags him into the airlock. He stabs her with a knife during the struggle. He is pushed out of the hatch by Christopher, but as they battle, he is also dragged into space. Prior to Zack successfully closing the hatch, he is also ejected by Sela. In the hopes that he would come back, she then begins looking for Christopher. She sees him suddenly, clinging to the ship. They both make it back in and let the others know that Zack is no longer with them. They put their weapons down. After a while, the crew meets in the mess hall for a supper. Christopher is asked by Sela how they can make sure that something like this doesn't happen again. They play back a few of Richard's recordings in which he states that people who survive the mission's challenges are evidence of humanity's tenacity and value. Sela is elected as the new chief when the team conducts another vote for leadership. She starts writing in a log that they will not be going back to the Blue Planet and that all choices would henceforth be decided collaboratively. As time goes on, the crew concentrates on fixing the ship and cooperating. Eventually, it is revealed that Sailor is expecting Christopher's child. A few years after the baby's birth, it can be seen playing with other kids while running around the ship. These kids grow up on the ship throughout time, and the elder generation aged 86 years after the expedition started. Before launching its drive to land on the alien world, the Humanitas is seen floating in space. The younger and older generations look forward to settling on the new planet.